Kristen Runge.
Here.
Jill Zitzelberger.
Microphone here.
Trisha Braun.
Here.
Brian Wallace.
Here.
Chris Thomas.
Here.
Kevin Phelps.
Here.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
All right. First item on the agenda is public comment. Does anyone have a public comment? All right. Do we have anybody?
Yes, we do have two forms of people that registered to speak during the public speaking. The first one is RJ.
Can Alan go first?
I'm sorry. Go.
Minutes.
Oh, I'm jumping ahead. Next item on the agenda for public comment is minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve minutes from last month. Second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. And now public comment.
We'll start with Alan Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks for the chance to speak. So my name is Alan Roberts. I am a happy Waunakee resident. I've been here about 13 years in Southbridge. And I've been very happy to be here. I'm a finance member for the finance elder for First Presbyterian Church on Highway Q. I'm also the vice chair of the committee looking for a new pastor. We just had our pastor who was here when the church was built on Highway Q in 1994 retire last year. And so we have 7 folks diligently looking to recruit a new pastor to our church. And I'm actually in Waunakee as a happy accident. When we moved here from New York, our friends said, got to go to Middleton. And one person said, well, maybe McFarland. That's where you live in Madison. We were coming back from Lake Wisconsin on a Saturday and drove past the church on Highway Q, what is now FPC, and turned in. And fortunately, there was someone inside the building and talked to us a bit about what a great community it was, what a great faith community it was. We went to church the next day and settled on Waunakee. So we made a good right turn into the church, and we're happy about that. And along the way, I've also learned quite a bit about Waunakee's tradition of facilitating, not encouraging or prohibiting, but encouraging great exercise of religion. One of the examples is that for the last 13 years, I've been on the Live Nativity Committee. You may know every year that Waunakee hosts several thousand people with a Live Nativity drive-through the week before Christmas. I'm not photogenic enough to be Joseph, but I can do traffic and I can be a shepherd, and that's the thing I do. And one of the things that brings me here tonight is there is some, we'll call it confusion, about whether the current access on Highway Q will continue in the future. Certainly from the point of view of the Live Nativity, which is our gift to the community, I think it would be very detrimental to that Live Nativity, besides the fact that we've been a good neighbor in the community for going on 30 years at that site at this point. So I'm here to express my concern about that and hoping we can find a good resolution to that potential issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next comment.
Sure. It's a hard one. I'm RJ Binau. Binau is how it's spelled, and my scribble on the sheet of paper might make that. Really, that's an A or a U, you might have said. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I too am an elder at the First Presbyterian Church of Waunakee, here to talk about Kilkenny Farms West. With me today are a number of folks from the church. I'd like everybody from First Presbyterian Church, and just walked in as our interim pastor. So hi, Glenn. Picking up on some things that Alan just said, we're here to talk a little bit. I'm here to talk a little bit about the ambiguity in the material that was posted to the website that seems to lead us and others who couldn't make it here today to be concerned about the access that First Presbyterian Church of Waunakee enjoyed since 1994 and hopes to enjoy into the future, and how some of the documentation posted to the website leads us not to think that that is intended to continue. And we've had some conversations today, some of us, with some of you, some of the staff in at the village of Waunakee, and some of the staff at the town of Westport. And there seems to be some positive news that there is some discussion that we aren't impacted and we're going to be fine. And what I would say is that's great news, that the stuff isn't accurate. And what I would ask is that we do what we can to right that wrong and get accurate documentation, and maybe note on the official final plat or in some kind of an official communication to the community that the church to the south of Kilkenny Farms West is not impacted. Our access is not impacted. I would ask for that. It goes beyond that. There's some of the more detailed information that's attached to the website, goes over the various lot numbers and the lot sizes. And when you look at lot 171, there's again some ambiguity as to whether or not the outgrowth of lot 171 impacts our right to access our property. We're also a little bit concerned about the buffer between our property and Kilkenny West. We want to be good neighbors to the folks that are coming to Kilkenny Farm West, but we just want to have some better understanding of how the buffer is going to look, where the buffer is. There isn't material that's attached to the website material that looks like an official survey. So maybe what we're asking for is maybe there seems to be the need for some more work, maybe a survey, and maybe a conversation with us at First Presbyterian Church to get a fuller understanding of the issues that we have and how the neighbor experience between us and Kilkenny Farms West is going to work in the future. And so any opportunity to get that material done, get that conversation to take place, if we need to ask you for a delay of 30 or 60 days to allow us to do that, or if you give us some understanding of how the process works, where we'll have that conversation. That's kind of what all of us are kind of looking for today, is some assurances about our access to County Road Q, because our address, after all, is 5763 Highway Q. And then more understanding of how the relationship between us neighbors is actually going to play out as Don and the gang at his is finished. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. I was paying attention to you and not to Tracy. So my bad. All right. Any other public comments?
None that are registered.
All
no.
right. Is anyone online? Nope, no one's online. All right. So no more public comments. Let's move on to the next item. And thank you, gentlemen, for coming to speak, and everyone that's here. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda. And I believe that was noticed. It's item number 1, which is noticed as a public hearing. So do we open the public hearing first, or do we hear the presentation first from staff?
I'll give a brief
Okay.
synopsis of the request. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Thanks, Chair Runge. The applicants are requesting approval of a conditional use permit for the property at 314 East Main Street to allow the conversion of a first floor use from a commercial use to a residential use. The property in the past had been used as such. This was a residential use several years ago. The first floor was converted to commercial, and now they wish to switch it back essentially to residential. Residential use in the C1D district is allowed through approval of a CUP. So it's really that straightforward. The staff is recommending approval of the request. The building is in conformance with and consistent with the neighboring residential properties. The applicant is not proposing any changes to the building exterior, which would alter the character of the building. So it's a fairly straightforward request.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that, Tim, and let's open the public hearing at 5:40 PM. Do we have anybody that would like to speak on the topic?
I have one registration, Justin Webster, 311 Grant Street.
All right.
Button
Mhm.
to make the light go green.
Thank you.
It's green. Sorry.
It's green. We're set. I appreciate your time tonight. Just a couple questions from the group around there. So do we know what the occupancy rate is going to be at the location at this time? Number of occupants, yep. So that's something that we're thinking about. How many vehicles are going to be allowed on the property at a single time? Are there current, it sounds like there aren't any planned development, expansion, renovation projects of the property at this time, but in the future. Who's going to be doing the property management? The maintenance, the property maintenance, also the tenant screening. That's something that we've kind of talked about a little bit. The lease agreement, and it sounds like you're the owner of the property. Okay. So those are some questions that kind of popped up in the neighborhood. Is that something, those questions can be answered now, or do we wait until later?
Later.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Any other items for public hearing on this item or any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at 5:42 PM. All right, and on to number 1, discuss and take action on a conditional use permit to allow multifamily use in the C1D zone district at 314 East Main. And again, this is an item for final action by the Plan Commission. So commissioners, what questions do we have?
Tim, do you want to answer his questions for us first?
My understanding is that the structure will house 2 households, so one upstairs, one downstairs. There will be, let me go back one slide. There, on the south side of the building, there are several parking stalls already there that could accommodate both households. It's unknown what the household number is for each unit. That's generally not a requirement of a zoning request, nor is the information about property management in this case. So staff is unable to answer those questions.
Other than I would just say that as part of the CUP, the applicant, like we put language in for all of our CUPs, they're required to comply with all federal, state, and local statutes. So for example, there are definitely limitations that the Village of Waunakee has with respect to the landlord-tenant relationship, but there are state statutes that address that, including maintenance of the property. We also have our own general maintenance rules that apply in our code to all properties. So the entire village code and all state statutes will continue to apply to this property, assuming, if you approve the CUP, and in that way, they would be treated like every other multifamily structure that's in the village.
All right.
Just to note, the applicant is here and may be able to address those questions.
All right. So management and number of occupants.
Yes. Hi, good evening. My name is Carl Meyer. My wife, Kate, is here. We live in Madison and we just recently purchased this property. So 2 things in addition to that might be helpful. We are wanting to make sure that the residential use includes that assuring that the renters are following all village, both ordinances and policies. And so we have drafted current house rules and in addition have built into the lease to assure that those are known and acknowledged by any potential tenant. And so in the event that you do approve the conditional use permit for that, and then already the upper unit is already approved to be used. So the for the 2-bedroom unit, which is the conditional use permit is in for, that would be a household of 2 adults plus children. So up to 2 adults plus children. A second point that I would like to make on that is that we know housing continues to be a challenge in this entire area. And we have an individual who has approached us and is interested in renting that. And the importance with that specifically is that this individual is here in temporary housing, but is serving in the nursing community locally here in Waunakee. And so by providing the opportunity for them to have housing would assure that this individual is staying here to continue to provide nursing care in this community. So property management will be done by my wife and I. So we are responsible. We live 15 minutes away. So that answers that. What else is needed to know?
Number of occupants was the only thing. You have an individual, and I assume that 2 adults plus children.
Yep. At this point, it's just her, and she's hoping that her mom will move from Milwaukee to be with her as well. So it'd be up to 2 adults.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, what questions do we have?
Do you have any history, or do you have other properties, that sort of thing?
This is our first. And so, yeah, we wanted to make sure that we're providing opportunities for fair and equitable housing. So we rewrote our own application process to do just that, and are also writing our own leases and in addition to those house rules, everything like that, to assure that there is a maximizing of effort of being responsible in our equitable housing practices, and then both assuring that we're being respectful of the neighbors and this community as well.
Okay. And the second question I've got is probably more one for staff. If at some point in the future, there's a desire to switch back to this residential over commercial kind of state, I assume we'd come through a similar process to this.
Yeah, we've, excuse me, we've done that in the past. Although it's permitted in the zoning code, it'd be somewhat akin to a change in use that we've reviewed for some of the grocery stores and things like that. So it'd be a simple review, but it would probably come
But
back.
similar to this process. Okay, thanks.
All right.
I'm happy to answer to the question regarding like developments or changes. The first floor unit, although it was utilized as a business, is still set up as a 2-bedroom home. So it's still 2 bedrooms, living room, bathroom, kitchen. So there's really minimal changes, just a couple updates to bring things up to code.
Great. Other questions? All right. Go ahead.
I missed it, but you said that upper unit is already rented?
The upper unit is permitted to be
Permitted, but
rented. Yeah,
nobody-
it's vacant right
Okay,
now. Yeah.
All right. And then pets, is it by unit? And how does that apply when you have multi-units in this particular setting?
I think the village does have a limit on number of pets
Yes.
per household.
Three,
Three,
I
yeah.
think. So does that mean we can have 6 here?
Yes.
Okay.
So our own policy, you want me to answer that too?
Well, if you want.
Yeah, so we know that pets are important. We also know pets can be destructive and damaging to neighborhoods. So we have put in our application policy that pets will be determined on an individual basis. We don't have any plans to allow for more than 1 dog or more than 2 cats, and even those are being considered on an individual case-by-case basis.
All right. Other questions? All right. Seeing no other questions, does anyone have a motion?
Sure, I'll move to approve the conditional use permit for 314 East Main Street as recommended by staff.
Second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Oh, you're welcome. Item number 2, discuss and take action on Kilkenny Farms West final plat and specific implementation plan. And this is, again, is an item for recommendation to the village board.
Thanks, Chair Unge. Yes, this is the an amended specific implementation plan for Kilkenny Farms West, along with the final plat. The final plat consists of 281 lots, 1 mixed-use lot, 2 commercial lots, and 46 outlots that will be used for parkland stormwater management, neighborhood signage, and cluster mailboxes. What you're seeing on the screen is an overall layout of Kilkenny Farms West. Just one item for clarification, the SIP or specific implementation plan is not part of this package for District 4 and 5 as shown on the screen, the red and orange. Those developments will require specific SIPs to come before this body when those sites develop. In addition, let's see. Just one other thing. Oh, I would like to comment, if I may, on some of the questions brought up by some of the church members. There is, bear with me, I'm going to switch. I don't see it on my screen. Go back to the plat. There is a easement that exists across the lot that is adjacent to the church. That's a shared access easement. That's not changing. So that access will remain as it currently is essentially is like a 3/4 intersection, allows right in, right out, and left in northbound traffic, but no left out heading northbound. So the configuration of that particular intersection along Century will remain as is with this development. Let's see, there are several items called out in several of the staff reports. Many of them are technical in nature. I just wanted to call your attention to a couple of them. Our fire department included a memo in the packet, but one of the I don't say minor concerns, but in terms of street naming, there's a street naming convention, Patty Ann's Way, along the westerly portion of the plat. If this is allowed, there will essentially be 2 intersections of Patty Ann's Way with Atlas Trail. That's going to have to be amended. That's a very minor thing, but easily resolvable. One other example, in the plat near the southwest corner of the development, near the wetland complex, there is an associated 75-foot wetland buffer adjacent to that wetland that encroaches onto about 7 or 8 lots, and they're called out here. Staff has a concern, not that the buffer is there per se, but what happens over time, especially as neighbors change hands and may not be I'll say this information may not always be top of hand. So staff recommends something more than just this notation on the plat as stated be added, whether it's to the covenants or to the lots themselves when they're sold, so they get recorded that there are these environmental corridors here. What tends to happen over time is individuals place structures, retaining walls, pools, sheds, etc., and those are not permitted by our regional plan commission, Dane County Water Quality Plan, and that can get lost in translation and then becomes an enforcement issue. So staff is recommending some modification again of the covenants or something that ensures that that's called out. So that's something to, again, easily resolvable thing. Staff met with the applicant's engineering team this afternoon and went over several of these things. But there are 2 separate motions this evening. One is related to the final plat. One is related to the SIP. The final plat will go to the village board, whereas the SIP would not, but staff is recommending conditional approval of both.
Right. Thank you very much, Tim. What questions do we have, commissioners? I believe, did we answer all of the questions from the church? Did we? Okay. That'd be my first question. Go
I
ahead.
do have a question. Is the house to the north of the church being removed? Or is that going to stay there?
Good question. The applicant's here and may be able to answer that. My understanding is for now, it's occupied. Where's, yeah.
That would be the one that Herb and I would have. Yeah, it's a very.
Don, could we have you go to the podium? Thanks.
Can you hear me? First of all, there's some church folks here. You've got a great church over there. One of the first things that Herb and Eileen Stotts, when I went to buy that property, they said, we have a favor. This was after it was pretty well a done deal. The church wants to widen their lot. Will you work with us? I said, absolutely. In other words, we've had a good relationship. The other thing we did with the church folks is when we did our road system, we met with, is there anybody here that I met with from the church as far as putting the road out to the west where you wanted it? And yeah, I'm 73, my mind, sometimes I can't pick up the names, you know. But at any rate, we worked with the church and we've got a nice road driveway that would be the one that comes out of the west where they wanted it. We worked out the deal to give them a wider lot. They've been good people to work with. But to answer the question about the house, yes, it's, if you've ever been in that house, it's a beautiful home. I'm not gonna, don't hold me to it, but sometime we might put a steeper pitch on the roof and, you know, make it look real cool, but it's a beautiful home, well built. And that's why we wanted that drive to stay where it is, and it's gonna stay.
All right. Other questions? We've got
Actually,
Joe.
Don, before you sit down there, I assume the road to the west you're talking would be Legend Way? Is that the coming out of the church property or connecting to the church property? Yeah, right there. I assume that's the one we're talking about.
Matt Schreiner, you want to come up here and help me? There was some discussion on the name Legend Way. Maybe you could.
Sure, yeah. So to answer your question, yes, Legend Way is the road that we're talking about that would extend to the west side of the church.
Okay, and are there, based on the discussion that you've had, what is the sort of ultimate plan with that access? Is that access into maybe a parking lot, or?
There is no plan.
There's no plan. It's just, you want to make sure there's some sort of access for the future, maybe.
None of us.
Okay,
Conversation on this. From the current elders, Alan and I, that are here today, there are no plans to extend that road.
Okay.
Neither plans nor money.
okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if that answers your question. So obviously, you know, the Kyron Way, as it comes down to the south side of the plat, you know, it is typical in planning out subdivisions like this. You know, there may not be a plan for how that road's going to extend through the neighboring property, but we need to make sure we maintain access to give them flexibility in the future to connect if they want to.
Excuse me, Matt. Question. This right here, we will build it to their property.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
There was a question about lot 171 too in the buffer, and I'm not sure, I cannot see the number, so I'm not sure which is 171. Is that, there we go. Yeah. And when you said buffers, were you referring to like a landscape buffer or?
Well, it was twofold. One,
Mm.
if you stare at the.
Oh, sure. It's twofold. One, if you stare at the material on the website,
Mhm.
171, that outgrowth that looks like an extension of the arm towards Highway Q looks to be the same as our access where we have an easement that had been referred to by staff earlier. So that was the one thing. The buffer there is that on Kilkenny Farm South, west part of the property, or does it encroach into our the right of way, the easement right of way for the access road? That's the one thing. The second thing is, you know, how on the colored pictures earlier in the presentation from the stuff that's on the website, Don and team look like they're going to do a number of trees as a buffer, and just how is that going to work? How does that actually look? You know, it's not a three-dimensional picture on the website. So just a question of, you know, what type of trees is Don going to plant there? What's the size? What's the overall plan there? If we could have a conversation.
All right. And I seem to recall, Don, we had a conversation about the first time I saw the plat, you explained the configuration of lot 171 to me. I, of course,
Excuse me,
wouldn't answer.
could I figure out
Yeah.
where 171 is?
It's right here. Yeah.
It's the existing.
Yeah.
house.
Yep.
That's where the house is, right?
Yeah.
That's where the existing home is. Okay, I'm sorry.
And so that the easement will still exist for access to the church there. I'm going to assume landscaping plans to, that they asked about.
I'll answer the question with a comment.
Okay.
When I went to the village, a lot of times if you develop in the city of Madison, they super micromanage you. You know, they're out there, they're just right on. So the village of Waunakee said, Mr. Tierney, would you put some trees down Peaceful Valley Parkway? So drive down there someday. We put a lot of trees there. We've got a tree spade, but I will not sit here tonight and say, I'm going to put this tree here and this tree here. We've worked hard. If somebody's got some good ideas, come and see me. But that's the one thing I hate to be is micromanaged, but I like to help people out.
All right. All right. Thank you. All right. Other questions, commissioners?
Yeah, lot 171, the infamous one. Actually on the drawings here shows like a line, like it's almost two separate lots. I'm assuming that's just separating the easement.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm on page 40, 42 and 105.
I'm just looking at a DVP of the drawings. I'm going to try and address that here. Bring it up.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm assuming it's just trying to isolate the easement area, right? But it's still considered part of 171. Okay, all right. I don't really have any questions. I would comment though that with Don's history here, as far as working with the neighbors and stuff, he has done a very good job with all of his developments, and I would just recommend that you just have the conversation. And I'm sure you guys can come to some agreements on what that should look like. Because he's done very well for the rest of the areas. It's just a matter of getting in the room and having that conversation.
Great. Other comments, commissioners, or questions? Chris?
Can you talk about your phasing a little bit? Where you're thinking you're going to start?
You mean phasing? Okay.
Are you thinking you're going to start towards Q, or are you going to start towards Woodland, or where's your plan to start?
It's kind of a puzzle. It's we got a few pieces that could have something to do with the commercial property. We've talked to some people. It has a lot to do with we're the first phase, because the second phase we would need to have a lift station or something. But the first phase, well, my understanding is to be around the funeral home. We need to have an entrance where Peaceful Valley is. Or we could make the entrance our first phase could be off of Woodland. But we have some things we have to figure out. In other words, what do we have to do on Q? What are some of these commercial clients, great clients that we're talking to? It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. We have to see how we can make it happen. But it's either going to happen right here where Peaceful Valley comes in would be the very first, or it would be the area where you come across on Woodland Drive. It has a lot to do with some of the clients we have in the commercial property. So we're working on it.
So my assumption then is that you'll probably have an opening on Woodland and Q for fire, whatever that would need to get in there during that time, just to make sure we have more than one access point.
We'll basically, even if it's a temp, we've already done it, whether it's temporary, we'll make sure there's two access points for the fire department.
Perfect.
Other questions?
I guess just clarification, there were some recommendations by staff of additional sidewalks and roadway widths that were in the staff reports. Just confirming that everything is good and what you plan on moving forward with, Tim, in your opinion?
I'm sorry, say that again, Tricia.
Like some of the additional sidewalks and walking paths that you are requesting, are those all good as far as some of the finer details that still need to be worked
We're
out?
still working that out. One of the issues on the south side of Woodland is the presence of a lot of subsurface utilities. And so there may be easements associated with that. So it's still our desire to see robust connectivity through this area, especially if that lot turns out to be multifamily. That would be important. And then, as you all know, the school is being constructed to the west, but we're still working that out with the applicant, but that is staff's desire to see those there.
Other questions or comments?
What's the timeline on working some of that out? Is it something we need to include in a motion or? You're
The way-
confident you'll get to the end.
Yeah, well, I guess it can be as specific as you want. The way it's currently, the motion is currently worded, there's latitude given to myself and the village engineer to work those things out. But if you want to put specific conditions of approval in, my understanding, that's your purview.
Nope, as long as you've got a mechanism to, from the timeline we're dealing with to get it to the board, right?
At this point, in talking to Don and his team, it's likely that the final plat would come before the board the first meeting in August. So some of this stuff, it's hoped for that these details could be worked out by that time.
Motion to recommend to the village board that it approve the final plat for Kilkenny Farms West Development, subject to the final approval by the community development director and village engineer with modifications to meet staff comments to the satisfaction of the village engineer. Do I need to make the second motion right away? One at a time?
I would second that.
Do we have discussion on the motion?
Absolutely.
All right.
Still have a couple of
Go ahead.
questions. As far as the declaration of covenants, I assume they're largely consistent with most of the other developments that Don has done. Is that
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then specifically 3.18 speaks to fences. I'm assuming that is almost identical. Okay, perfect. So it's consistent with what's been done and approvals and perfect. Excellent. Okay, thank you.
All right. Other questions? Chris?
Just one, with the motion, should we be adding anything that to assure the First Presbyterian Church that we are not? I don't know if that's something we could add in or not, Brian.
I don't think it is, because at the end of the day, this is the approval of a final plat by a governmental body does not impact underlying easements existing between two property owners. The easement issue is fundamentally an issue between the property that the church is on and the property that the applicants own. And so, I mean, my understanding is that the easement exists. It's going to continue. We might need to work and make sure that there's a notification on the plat that specifically identifies that. But I would not recommend including that as part of the motion, because that's an issue between two private parties.
But I do think what the church would love to hear on the record would be these guys saying they have no interest in getting rid of it, and the village saying they have no interest in getting rid of it.
Yeah, but we don't have the power to say that. At the end of the
There's
day,
no plans in the works to get rid of it.
and again, I don't dispute that, but that's a matter between two private property owners. That's not a matter for the village. of
If I could
Waunakee.
jump in here, the easement was recorded in 1992. It should have been shown on the final plat, and it wasn't, and that was our mistake. The intent is to keep that easement. There's no intent at this time for that easement to be released, and it will be shown on the final plat when it comes to the board.
And the only thing I would add is if it's a standard access easement, for it to be released, both parties would have to agree to be released. And so that's essentially why the village doesn't get involved, because the property owner that benefits from the access easement still has control over the access easement.
All right, any other questions? None? All right, seeing none, let's vote on the motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion passes. All right, now we have we're not done. We have a second motion on this property, don't we? So second motion, does anyone want to make a second motion?
I do have a question though. Did we had a second on that, right?
Yes, yeah. We were in order.
Motion to approve the specific implementation plan, subject to final approval by community development director with modifications to meet staff comments to the satisfaction of the village engineer and conditioned upon village board approval of the final plat.
Second? Oh, you can have it. Yeah. All right, any discussion on this motion? No, seeing no discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 3, discussion take action on an amendment to section 133.995 of the zoning code regarding parking requirements for certain residential and non-residential uses. And this is an item for recommendation to the village board.
Thanks, Chair Runge. The materials are found on pages 97 through 105 of your packet. Let me get this up on the screen as well. My hope this evening, so this is the third time, I think, Jason, fourth time. The language has come before the Plan Commission since, I think, 2018-19, somewhere in there when this topic began to be discussed. And the commission looked at this last time about a year ago and asked that more clarity be provided regarding the old versus new, or I should say our current versus proposed standards. So what I'm going to put on the screen right now is the table, and it's divided up into 3 pages. So we can just, instead of vote on it, just understand what the changes are proposed before determining whether or not they're good or bad. So in just a moment here, and these, again, this material is in your packet. So what is shown on the screen in red are the new proposed standards, and what is stricken in black is what the language would be essentially replaced with in what is shown in red. You may recall this began, I think the primary catalyst, and Jason, our village planners here, who did a lot of the heavy lifting on the language, but really with multifamily developments. And over time, not just in this community, but in several communities throughout Dane County, multifamily developers look to community parking standards have said, we don't need that much parking. So communities have been updating their parking standards. The village has not to this point. Our current standard, and it's stricken, it may be a little bit hard to read, is 2 stalls for each dwelling unit, period. There's no consideration to size, number of bedrooms, or anything. So what we're proposing, and what has been granted, I might add, in the last several 4 or maybe even 5 multifamily projects, are essentially these standards, and they're very similar, or maybe the same, jump in, Jason, to what Middleton proposes. I think that they're very similar or the same as Sun Prairie and a couple other communities. So the standards would be based on number of bedrooms versus just per unit. So a studio bedroom, what we're proposing would be 1 stall. A 1-bedroom unit would require 1.5 stalls per 1-bedroom unit. And then for 2 bedrooms or greater, 2 stalls would be required, which is what our current standard is. There's another proposal in here regarding covered parking, and this was put in here more for discussion. Some communities require this, some don't, but it's stated as 1 parking stall per unit must be enclosed or below living quarters. We do not have such a standard right now. You may want to discuss whether that's appropriate or not. But if I may, just let's go through this just so we understand what the current versus proposed are, and then we can come back and look at that if that's okay.
Yes.
All right. So going through the next type of use, elderly housing, instead of 1.2 stalls for each dwelling unit, that's what's stricken or proposed to be stricken. It would be 1 stall per dwelling unit plus 1 stall for each employee on the largest work shift. So that takes into account the workforce, which most frequently, people drive to a site. Next is related to hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts. Instead of 1.2 stalls for each guest room, a similar one where it's 1 stall per bedroom, plus accounting 1 stall for each employee on the largest work shift. Nope, excuse me. Some changes to the classification, retirement homes, nursing homes, convents, monasteries. I don't know how many convents, monasteries, et cetera, there are anymore, or in the village for that matter, but the word retirement homes is sort of redundant to nursing home in a way, and it's addressed elsewhere in the code. So proposing some changes to the nomenclature there. Instead of 1 stall per resident, it's 1 stall per 6 patient beds, again, plus 1 stall per employee on the largest work shift. So again, related to the number of workers. Theaters, I think there's just some additional language here, Jason. I don't know if this has changed much. 1 stall for each 5 seats or 1 stall for each patron equal to 20% of building capacity, whichever is greater. The next standard is for schools, and this one we break it out between elementary and junior high schools, and then upper education or high school voc tech schools. With the understanding that essentially people in elementary and junior high schools don't have driver's license. So there, the proposed standard is 1 space per teacher and staff member plus 1 space per 2 classrooms. And then for a high school or a voc tech school, grades 9 through 12, 1 stall for each 5 students, age 16 or greater, plus 1 stall for each employee on the largest work shift. And then for a tech school, 1 stall for each 2 students during the largest class attendance, plus 1 stall for each employee on the largest work shift. I don't believe there are any tech schools in the village as to yet, but that may be something that may get consideration in the future. For libraries, museums, art galleries, other public buildings, this would be lessened from 1 stall per 300 feet of floor area to 1 stall per 500 feet. Then for funeral homes, this again takes into consideration number of employees. Current standard 1 stall for 300 square feet of floor area. The new standard 1 space per 3 patrons at max capacity, plus 1 space per employee on largest work shift. Let's see, did I miss any? Okay, then churches, other places of indoor religious assembly, instead of 1 stall per 300 square feet of floor area, 1 stall per 5 seats at maximum capacity. Seems like I missed something, but maybe not. Oh, yeah, retail and business commercial service. Our current standard is 1 stall per 200 square feet of floor area. And the new standard would be 1 stall per 300 square feet of floor area. And I think that's consistent with many of our peer communities.
And the distinction there being that right now thank you. Right now, the ordinance says 1 per 200, but only the area used for customer sales, which we don't usually know when we're approving. Because most often commercial spaces, most of the ones we've seen since I've been working with the village have been sort of white boxes at the time of approval. And so I've usually used an 80% assumption, but it's just been an assumption. So instead, this moves it from 200 to 300, but then says it applies to the gross area. So we can just use the footprint of the building, basically.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. One of the other things that the Plan Commission brought up last year, asked staff to look into, was the impact of these ordinance or the changes to the standards specifically to those multifamily projects. And so we partnered with the police department. They provided some data and really found that there really aren't many complaints associated with those projects. There are, so for example, at 301 East Main, this is the Madison and Main project. There were a couple parking issues, and then again, this is over the last 3 years, for someone parked in a handicap spot, and then another person parked in a stall in the what was determined to be a residential area. That was there. Let's see, Connery Cove Apartments. This is the Laurel, on just south of where we are right now. The primary parking complaints related to, I think it was 3 or 4 vehicles parked in the street. 3 of them were, turns out, had dead batteries or were vehicles in need of repair. 1 person was sleeping in their vehicle at the time. So not necessarily related to parking overflow or, surplus or detriment of parking. And then in the 200 to 300 block of Maine, several of the parking related issues had to do with parking near the Brown Automotive facility at the corner. So from police data, it shows that that standard that was adopted over the last few years, I use the term loosely standard, that guideline seems to have resulted in minimal parking or traffic conflicts. So with that, I guess, open for discussion. We can talk about more. The full ordinance is in your packet, but I really wanted to, again, get those proposed changes before you, so you understand what they are before determining whether they're good or bad. And we can take it wherever you want.
All right. Thank you very much for the summary.
And I don't know, Jason, did I miss anything or for now? Okay.
All right. What questions or comments do we have? Yeah, Kevin.
So did I not hear you correctly? The last 4 or 5 that we've approved, they use the stricken version or the red version?
The red version.
Okay,
The,
so
new-
that's
the new version.
the new version,
Air
okay.
quotes, yeah.
And then number two, I know because it might be relevant soon, the hotel, how does the restaurant impact that? Is that viewed separately for parking or is that just part of the hotel?
Each of those uses would be evaluated separately, and then we'd look at the aggregate parking demand when looking at that site plan.
Chris?
Can I ask about grandfathering? I'm assuming that any structure that's up now would have to follow what's stricken.
Whatever was approved at the time of their approval would be their standards.
And then if there's a current structure that submits a CUP or something for outdoor seating, so they're making a change, would they then be beholden to the new language?
I think, I'm gonna look over at Brian. I think the answer is we can make them now at a time of conditional approval. I think it would depend on what the request is, but I guess I'd defer to.
I think
Brian.
that's what it is. It depends on the magnitude of the modification to, I mean, how much new parking is theoretically being added? I mean, and then we'd have to look at it on a case by case basis, I'd say.
Okay.
I guess that was my question, thinking of Lamp House, just because that's the multifamily parking area I frequent most because of the retail that's there. I've never really had a problem finding a spot, but it's also not a sea of empty parking. Is there some inclusion of flexibility or something provided for mixed use multifamily developments that you want here just to have that as a known consideration?
Yeah, there actually is language, and I'm trying to call it up in the packet right now. That allows the commission to grant variation from strict adherence to the standard. That's in our code now, and that would continue.
Although I would say I would limit that language. That's one of the problems that we have acted, I think, very practically over the last 10 years and done, I think, what makes sense. The code really needs to be updated because if you have a code, you need to follow it. And if you're going to have exceptions, they need to be very narrow exceptions. And, you always want to have a little wiggle room, but I think that we've probably made the right decisions in the parking that's occurred over the last 10 years, but it's not consistent with the code, which is why we need to update the code.
Yeah, Tim, I guess that was my point for if this is the minimum standard that you're looking for from multifamily projects, knowing that if there are retail establishments, those hours vary between when people will be in the retail centers, usually when people will be parked in the houses, just to have it called out as for known flexibility in that regard or consideration. Something to think about.
Yeah, I'll note that, so this is subsection 11 of the current ordinance has a requirement that any potential conflict between mixed uses that would indicate that all that parking is going to be needed at the same time. That needs to be evaluated, and that's right in the ordinance. And the only thing that we've proposed in the draft that we prepared a few years ago, the only change to that existing set of requirements that we proposed is that there be basically a floor on how low you can go when you start combining uses, and saying that when you calculate the aggregate of what's needed, you couldn't bring it down below 80% of what they would need independent of each other.
So am I interpreting that correctly? There's not a hard formula then for mixed use? That's a negotiation?
Basically, yes. And we're just adding in a floor saying like, if you're going to reduce it, you're not going to go below 80%, but a hard and fast formula to get to exactly how many spaces you need. No, because you do have to consider what are the potential uses here and when are they going to have demand?
Okay. Did you have one?
Yeah, I'm curious and maybe a little bit concerned about the language that occurs a couple of places in here about the largest work shift. Particularly because with a lot of businesses, what they initially think may be their largest work shift could certainly change over time for any number of reasons. But at that point, it's kind of too late to go changing parking. So is that really the direction that we would want to take, or is there any, parameters around that would help?
Yeah, good question. Jump in here, Jason. But if I would say that's a good starting point, because absent that, how many employees are working at a given establishment? What other metric would you use? If it's just a arbitrary, number based on a size, that may not reflect actual parking demand. So I think, for example, it's difficult for new businesses who have no track record of parking demand, but for individuals or companies who have a history, I'm just going to throw out a name, not picking on them or saying they're good or bad, but just like a Starbucks who has a lot of stores across the country and probably has a lot of parking data, and they can say, here's what our experience shows, here's what we need. Then they could rely on that as evidence for what parking demand would be. In the case of a new, I don't know what would be like assisted living facility or something like that, that just someone does for the first time where they don't have a lot of experience. They may, hire a lot of people at the beginning. It may not be what they need. Now they're, have an excess of parking. If I think that's where you're going.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going. But I was thinking the other way around. It's an assisted living type thing, and they start off thinking they're going to need X number of employees, but over time, instead of needing, 30, they suddenly discover they need 50 on their largest shift. And, then now all of a sudden they're short by 20 spots.
Let's see, what would be an example? We recently looked at a site plan for newcomer that included an expansion of both their building footprint as well as parking. And I think that they were calculating that parking need based on their employee need and square footage of building. But again, there's someone who has a bit of a track record on use. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a hard and fast, this is how you do it. But I think that using employee count is a more objective metric in determining parking demand than what we currently have, in my opinion.
Sure.
Jason, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. And I think we are trying to build in some nuance that acknowledges the, wide variety. I think the one that jumps out to me the most is the manufacturing parking requirement, which right now is 1 stall per 1,000 square feet. And manufacturing facilities can vary dramatically. And, that's maybe the one that has the greatest potential to end up in a bind, because you start out with a use that says, we've got this big equipment and we need 5 people and that's it. And then later it's something that's more handwork and it requires more. And so, I think that particular category is the one that worries me the most. Though in general, the trend that we see is toward fewer people and more equipment. So that is a bit of a counterpoint to, you're not often going to be in this situation. We might reconsider that one a bit just to make sure we've got some kind of minimum floor on that. But in most cases, I think it does become a bit of a discussion. And your ordinance has, I think, worked pretty well for you in that it allows Plan Commission to be a little loose and to respond to what the applicant is asking for. And I'd say it's so far been working out pretty well to have a negotiated discussion, so to speak, of what do you really need and what's going to work here.
Thanks. I appreciate the thoughts. And I, like you said, I don't know that there's really anything that is more objective than that. It's just because there's the ability for that to flex over time.
Especially if you think about the way things are going with AI and automation and things like that. You could have a building that has a lot of automation. For whatever reason, it changes hands and you have a fairly large size building that now has a high employee need. And then what are you going to do in that situation? I don't know if that's going to happen, but
probably
it's
at some
possible.
point.
Yeah.
Excellent. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Brian and Chris, do you guys have any questions?
At first I was, when I saw this was on the agenda item, I was immediately a little, well, let me start over. First of all, great work. I think this is well put together, all right? But I am a little concerned on, trying to control parking. And I get, we've had some, requirements in the past. Now, a couple of things that concern me on this, which again, I think for the most part is pretty good here. We have in here and on paragraph 9, I believe, is only a maximum of 10% over the minimums, because these are all minimums, correct? So as Joe just talked about the example, if we have a business that goes in, a manufacturing facility goes in and they have 10,000 square foot, whatever, but they only have 5 employees, but also the next company that maybe comes in there in 10 years or 15 years because of whatever changes, or if the other one moves on or whatever, and they need 30 employees. But we've already created a parking lot or a parking situation that only accommodates the original. We've kind of hamstrung opportunity for that building in the future to be leased, rented, sold, whatever. All right, so I'm a little concerned about that control or minimizing or impacting that with a minimal increase of only 10%. So some sort of language that allows, and again, after the fact, it's a little more challenging because of space requirements and expanding parking lots, but even up front, how do we make sure that projects are attractive moving forward for potential business?
So if I may, I'd say keep reading that section, because that points to, even though our attorney has a little bit of concern about that, it's essentially says the plan commission could allow special exceptions. And so that's where, as Jason talked about, those negotiated site plans regarding parking would come into play.
Sure, and I love the example you gave about, say Starbucks or whatever, where they come in and they have a historical number, right, that they can use. As long as we're, consistent on the use of that, I think we can probably get by that. I just thought 10% was a little small. Okay. The other couple of things in here was one about curb around the parking lot, and hey, I'm in construction and I think that curbs can clean things up considerably. So I'm all for that, but I just do think that is, from a cost perspective of building a project, can be a factor that maybe we think it's minimal, but if you say curb around all these parking lots, can be sometimes financially a challenge. All right. But even more so is the one, and again, a lot of them probably do it on these apartment complexes, but when we say that you have to have, and I say this in the environment that we are currently in about affordable housing, and we say that every multifamily unit that comes in here has to have some sort of covered or underground parking, we're driving the cost of that project up. And when we talk about affordable housing, we're kind of contradicting each other.
But if I may, so good point on that one. Last year, when I looked at the cover memo, that specific topic was called out as staff's not necessarily in favor of that, but wanted you to discuss that for exactly the reason you're talking about. I think if a site is constrained by its size and a developer has to go down, then they're limited in choice to do that. But if we don't, if they can accommodate parking where they don't have to incur that cost, especially for housing, and that helps to lessen the cost burden, I think that's.
Yeah,
So if you want to strike that again.
Well, and I would defer, but I bring that up because I think that's, although it's a nice finish, right? When we have covered parking, we have to make sure that we're taking that into consideration, what the cost of housing is going forward. So
we haven't, the village hasn't had that as a standard currently, but I think it's the market somewhat drives that. And so if it's not there now, and it's not, it's not
yeah, and most of
impacting anything, maybe
most of the developments, and you can probably answer this, Tim, like, Laurel and the one going up now, those all have underground parking. I'm not sure what Viridian's doing out there, if they have I think they do, right?
They do.
So to your point about the market kind of drives that, if that's what the developer so chooses to do, I kind of would leave that flexible and open would be my perspective, but I would defer.
If I could jump in, I would also note that I think we drafted these about 4 years ago. I last touched it 3 years ago. And I wouldn't today recommend that. It does reflect some discussion that was going on amongst staff at the time. Maybe we should, but I agree. I would advise, let the market decide.
All right, great. Chris?
Parking is absolutely better talking about than sidewalks, but in my experience, at least to this point, one question, as we're going through this with the school district putting up a lot of new buildings here as they're ongoing, have you discussed this with them?
Short answer, yes. So when the elementary school site plans came in, as well as we're talking to them right now about the middle school on South Street, they're using both metrics.
And they were good with the metrics?
Mhm.
Okay, and then last was just grocery stores. Where do they fall under? Retail business?
Yes.
Okay, since that's something that's of a hot topic, and if that's consistent with what's out there, then I'm good with that too. So, that's it.
All right. So Jason, are there any other recommendations that you would recommend or not recommend now after 4
Meaning,
years?
like, on what have I changed my mind since
Yeah.
in the past
Yes.
3 years?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's anything else. We made some minor tweaks here and there just to make things clearer. I'd point out that I think right now there is a requirement that if you are adjacent to a residential district, that you've got to have your parking set back by 25 feet from that district. And we have at times found that to be constricting. And found that, the preference has been to come up with some kind of barrier while allowing that parking to be closer. And I think that has ended up, and so I'm trying to both find it and talk at the same time, but that has ended up coming into play, I believe, even when we've had multifamily next to single family. So this is in, I think, location. So this is section 3. And what it says right now, the ordinance says right now that no parking space or driveway shall be closer than 25 feet to a residential district lot line. And the clarification is just to say that no parking space or driveway in a non-residential district shall be closer than 25 feet. So it was that issue of, this seemed to be forcing us to apply that between multifamily and single family where that wasn't really the intent. And this is trying to clean that up. So otherwise, all the other big items, I think you guys have identified for, kind of reaction and discussion. So that's it.
All right. Trisha, you've got another question.
No, I'm actually going to piggyback on Joe's comment and go back to the trying to establish a parking by number of employees, and just think for implementation for staff and also for just consistency in the commercial real estate world, whether it's a speculative development, and there's like multi-tenant flex space, or there's some office in conjunction with the manufacturing or warehouse, that I think just using a market standard would be safer and easier for you to implement. And, those guidelines are pretty readily available. And I think a lot of people that are developing a certain type of building are used to or accustomed to knowing that there could be flexibility based on what's the surrounding use or like expansion plans for in the future. But I just think for your staff's benefit, long-term, it would be easier to implement that.
I think the trick with that is that there are so many variations in use. And if we tried to specify all of those uses and include them in the ordinance, we would have both a task on our hands to do it and this really big ordinance, and then it wouldn't necessarily hold up over time as use has shifted. Most of these don't worry me. I think, in each case, we're kind of asking the initial applicant to give us a decent estimate. And I think, staff, plan commission, applicant can together kind of evaluate, does this seem reasonable? I think a couple of thoughts on revisions that we might offer. One is to maybe add a note that compels staff and plan commission to consider possible ways that a use might change in the future when approving an employment-based a standard where those apply in here. The other is for staff to look more specifically at that manufacturing and warehousing item and come back with a variation on that one, because that's the one that I think right now, 1 per 1,000 square feet has the potential to be requiring way too much parking, but our new standard of 1 per employee has the potential to require too little, not knowing what may come in the future. So on that one, I would suggest we definitely take another look.
And the only thing I would add to that, I was just gonna say, if we could have a floor on the commercial one, you know what I mean? Just if somebody builds a 20,000 square foot warehouse and they said they're gonna work in there by themselves, that's one employee, there needs to be a floor, right? So that we know someday it could be used for something else.
And that might be the easiest, that was what was in my head as the easiest resolution there.
All right, is it possible with that to make it green space that could be converted to a parking lot? I hate to pave if we don't have to pave.
So
Or Brian, you might have an opinion on that. Am I? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
there are other ways, in my past, I've worked with site plans that have used, pavers, certain types of pavers that allow grass to grow through that can kind of serve dual function for overflow parking. There are ways of doing that, but I think it's difficult to gauge. Because either it's parking or it's not, it's saved for future parking. You can landscape it or something like that. I mean, obviously parking takes up a fair bit of real estate. So it's kind of tough, but.
I do think that that's worth consideration, that we require an area be reserved based on an area calculation of the building. But then we only require construction of parking based on its actual usage.
The one employee.
Yeah, or
A very
minimum.
lonely employee.
So, if the use changes and the employees change, that there is room to expand.
All right.
Got a couple extra comments or questions. Piggybacking on what people have been talking about with like manufacturing or other businesses like that. Is it possible to maybe incorporate both of these and have them have to have at least the amount for the larger of the two? So if right now it's 1,000 square feet, and like we said, 20,000 square feet, but only one employee, they have to, if it's one employee, that's 20,000 square feet would say you need 20 parking spaces. The largest of those two is 20. So would they then be required to have 20? So could we just modify this to incorporate both things that we have, with the existing and the new, and make them pick the larger of the two?
Again, concern being that we're requiring more than is needed. And so we're trying to get some more nuance in here that doesn't end up putting a bunch of excess pavement down. I think the solution is a variant of what you were saying, where the space is there, but maybe not necessarily the pavement initially, so that we're reserving the possibility of that parking without requiring that they put down the pavement right off the bat. And I'm worried less about the 20,000 square feet facility than I am like the 100,000 square feet facility.
Okay, then my second comment or question is on the number 9 that Brian had mentioned, and I know that Plan Commission has some authority when that comes through. I'm just wondering where that 10% came from, and if that number should vary based on the use. I mean, if you got a building that has 4 one-bedroom apartments in it, you need 6 spaces, 10% more. I mean, we're saying you have to have 6 or 7 spaces and that's it. And if you have any other number, the Plan Commission has to allow that now.
You have been kind of routinely allowing things in a pretty efficient way that are variations from what it requires. Basically, that 10%, I don't recall any particular source for that, so I'll just say, we invented that. But as it says in here, that's basically a trigger for discussion. And if you show the need, we expect Plan Commission is going to approve. It doesn't say that last part. It just refers to Plan Commission is granted the ability to allow exceptions. In practice, that's exactly how it has played out. Applicant says, well, here's what we really need. And Plan Commission, I think, has consistently said, okay.
A possible genesis of that standard came from the proverbial Black Friday parking, where whatever big box store would come in and say, oh, we got to have this much parking to accommodate holiday parking. And then, 95% of the year, it's empty. So I think that may be at least a source of where that ceiling came from, so that you're not way over parking or requiring something way over parking. Or if someone says, oh, I gotta have 60 extra or whatever the number is, extra stalls, and you go, really? Especially in this day and age of online shopping and the nature of changes to commercial retail. I don't know if that's going to be a thing in the near future and continued future.
Where this could have helped, it wasn't needed, but so when the Hy-Vee was approved, they had a lot of parking. And at the time, because it was a GDP, we said, hey, we've got this requirement that our GDP ordinance says, we're trying to limit impervious surfaces. And so we'd like you to bring that down. And they looked at it and said, yeah, we don't really need all that. And they brought it down. But in absent a, planned unit development approach, just regular zoning, you don't have any, other than just asking, you don't have any tool in here to limit someone and kind of force that discussion and say, well, what do you really need? This would give you the ability to say, what do you really need?
All right, other comments, questions? It's Joe, yes.
Yeah, in light of the discussion that we've had and some potential, I don't know if changes or at least suggestions for things, are we still looking to potentially approve this tonight, or are we looking to go back and tweak?
No, to your first question, I since we haven't looked at this in over a year, I was hoping that my plan was at least to have a good discussion and then bring back whatever changes may be, even if there were none, because it's been a while, and it'll give you all at least a month to look at this again and familiarize yourself with the proposals, and then whether it's next month or September, say, yep, we're ready to move it forward. But we have a little more homework after tonight's discussion, so we can bring back the next iteration. Hopefully next month, maybe, I would think no later than September.
And then in light of that, do we need to actually still make a motion to table it or anything, or?
Well, so I don't know if, remind me if, let me look at the agenda. I don't know if this was actually called out for action.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, okay.
Yeah, there was a
Then
motion.
I, out of abundance of caution, I think it would be fine to request postponement of any action.
Motion to table.
Second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Yes, I have a question.
Oh, okay,
You have enough information?
I think so. Yeah, between our notes, yes.
Good
excellent.
question.
All right, great question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion passes. All right, that's the end of our agenda. Anyone have another motion?
No.
Oh, wait, Joint Plan Commission. Oh my gosh, so sorry.
So the only item scheduled for tomorrow's Joint Plan Commission is a discussion of the Kilkenny Farms final plat and SIP, similar to this evening. So we'll bring comments to the JPC tomorrow that were discussed this evening.
All right, that was our last item.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, motion carries.
Yeah.
Wait.
Thank you for such short. That was-